1 year ago tomorrow, Hamas unleashed the worst terrorist attack on Israel in its history. Around 1,200 people were killed. Of the 251 taken hostage that day, 97 remain captive. And ever since, stability in the Middle East has deteriorated. Earlier today, Israeli airstrikes on a mosque and school sheltering refugees in the Gaza Strip killed 24 people and injured 93 others. The IDF said it had conducted, quote, precise strikes on Hamas terrorists operating in the facility. Gaza's health ministry reported today that 41,871 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's military operation since the October 7th attacks last year. In Lebanon, here's new video showing another airstrike in Beirut's southern suburbs. There's still no word on casualties from this latest strike. In an excerpt of an exclusive interview with 60 Minutes, Vice President Harris said the United States remains committed to reaching a ceasefire agreement.
Now, the work that we do diplomatically with the leadership of Israel is an ongoing pursuit around making clear our principles, which include the need for humanitarian aid, the need for this war to end, the need for a deal to be done, which would release the hostages and create a ceasefire. And we're not going to stop in terms of putting that pressure on Israel and in the region, including Arab leaders.
The year-long wait for a permanent ceasefire agreement has been especially painful for the families of Hamas's hostages. At least 33 of the 97 people still being held captive in Gaza today are believed to be dead. Protesters gathered around the world this weekend to call for the remaining hostages' release and hear from those freed. 63-year-old American-Israeli Aviva Siegel was one of dozens released during a temporary ceasefire last November. She spent almost 2 months in captivity with her husband, Keith, who is still being held in Gaza today.
I've been married to Keith for 43 years. Most of the times we weren't allowed to even whisper. So we used to just look at each other in the eyes. I will not allow myself to lose my hope, because if I do, who will scream for Keith?
Keith Siegel is now one of the last 4 American hostages thought to be alive. His wife says he was shot in the hand and broke several ribs while they were being abducted on October 7th. Joining me now is Keith Siegel's brother, David Siegel, who joins me now. Mr. Siegel, thank you very much for coming to the Sunday show on the eve of I hesitate to call it an anniversary, because anniversaries connote celebration. This is nothing to celebrate. How are you and the family feeling?
It's very difficult. It's been a year, and when October 7th happened, we were immediately in steady communication with our family in Israel as well as our family in the States. And although those who've been involved in hostage release negotiations in other settings told us these kinds of things can go on for a long, long time, we couldn't believe in that moment that a year from then, Keith would still be a hostage.
You know, over several times we have heard President Biden say that the framework of a ceasefire deal is there only to see those efforts thwarted. And I use that word ceasefire deal on purpose because you don't like the word deal when talking about ceasefire. You prefer ceasefire agreement. What's your issue with the word deal?
It connotes other kinds of negotiations in my mind, not when you're talking about people's lives and family members. It sounds like a business transaction, and there does need to be an agreement around a ceasefire. We pray for that every day, for Keith's release, for the release of the other hostages, and for the end of all the death and destruction that's accompanied this.
In an interview with my MSNBC colleague, Jose Diaz-Balart, your sister-in-law, Keith's wife, Aviva Siegel, said that she believes that Keith believes he's been forgotten. Do you believe Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing enough to get Keith and the remaining hostages released?
What we want is for all leaders who are in a position to influence whether the hostages are released or not, to do whatever they can do. It's not clear to us that Prime Minister Netanyahu has made release of the hostage his highest priority, and that's disturbing to us.
How concerned are you that the effort to hold Hamas accountable for October 7th has now expanded to include the retaliation of Hezbollah? How concerned are you that this expansion is taking attention away from your brother, from the remaining hostages there being held by Hamas?
Well, I think what's now going on in Lebanon and between Hezbollah and Israel does not make it easier to find a ceasefire agreement. And in that way, it confounds the attempts to bring this to an end and bring Keith and the other hostages home. I don't see how it couldn't. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a military person. I can't really speak to the strategic dimensions of it. But in answering your question, it's another front and another confrontation that would seem to make it difficult for the parties to sit down with mediators and find an agreement.
Final question for you. If you had the opportunity right now, if by some miracle both President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu were right here, what's the one thing you would tell them on the eve of the one-year mark?
Well, I think it's important to point out that the Biden administration has been exceptionally accessible to us and communicative with us about all the efforts that they're putting in. If they were sitting in front of me, I would say, you are the leaders of two countries that are in a position to strongly influence the establishment of an agreement and a ceasefire that would bring my brother home. And I need you to do that.
David Siegel, brother of Keith Siegel, who has been held by Hamas for 364 days. Thank you for coming to the Sunday show. My thoughts, our thoughts and prayers are with you, your family, but most importantly, with Keith Siegel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.